Hello bookworms, it's Jade from Bedtime Bookworm and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm bringing you my October reading wrap-up. I read 4 things in October, which doesn't sound like a lot, and it's definitely less than I had wanted to read. But in addition to these 4 books that I read, I also read over 700 pages in Oathbringer by Sanderson, so I guess maybe I read more than I thought. Unfortunately, I didn't finish Oathbringer in time to include in this wrap-up. It's gonna have to wait till next month. But that's not why you guys are here. You want to hear about the things that I actually finished in October. So like I said, I read 4 things, and while quantity-wise that might not seem like that much, quality-wise, I had a pretty solid reading month. This is how my ratings panned out. That's right, all 4 of the things that I read, I gave 4 stars. 2 of these books were part of a series, neither of which were series starters. They were both mid-series books, which is great because I am always trying to make progress on the many series that I'm currently in the middle of reading. These are the 4 books that I'm going to be talking about in this video today. If you're only interested in hearing my thoughts on some of them, I will have timestamps down in the description box so you can jump right to the ones that you're most interested in. Alright, let's get right on into it. The very first book that I finished in October was Edgedancer by Sanderson, which is the novella between the second and third book, so 2.5 in the Stormlight Archives series. I say novella a little hesitantly, it is almost 300 pages. It's basically just a short novel. Hey. Don't hit my tripod. What are you doing? Go over there. Go over there. I did purchase an ebook copy of this. Well, actually, I purchased an ebook copy of Arcanum Unbounded, which is a bind-up of a bunch of short stories and novellas in the Cosmere, which is the wider universe that the Stormlight Archives is set in. So I did have it on ebook and I read some of that on ebook, but I primarily listened to the audiobook, which is narrated by Kate Redding, who is fantastic and is one of my favorite narrators. The audiobook was actually available on Scribd, which is a service that I use every month. I do have like one of those referral links. Anybody who has a Scribd account has a referral link, but I have one of those linked in my description box. If you use it to try Scribd out, you'll get 60 days for free, and I also will get 30 days for free. I want to stop here and just thank everybody who has used my link to try out Scribd, because I haven't had to pay for Scribd for a really long time, and I super duper appreciate it because I use it all the time. Anyways, on to what I thought of Edgedancer. So Edgedancer is a short story novella about Lift, who we see for the first time in Words of Radiance, the second Stormlight Archives book. Lift is a character that a lot of people don't like. They find her kind of annoying. She is a child character, and I think that kind of plays into it, and I could see why she would be annoying. She is definitely kind of like the annoying kid sister who thinks she knows everything, and she's kind of like really spontaneous and doesn't think things through, which now that I'm saying that out loud, that's usually not the type of character that I really enjoy, but I just think she is hilarious. She's obsessed with food and she loves pancakes, and she has a spren named Wendell, and I love Wendell so much. He is maybe my favorite spren. I mean, I haven't spent that much time with him at this point, but he's hilarious, and the banter between Wendell and Lift, it was cracking me up like the whole time. I'm generally someone who is a little picky with banter. A lot of times I don't find that it works for me. I just think it's kind of dumb. But Sanderson's banter has definitely been working for me in the Stormlight Archives. After I had read Lift's interlude in Words of Radiance, I was really excited to read Edgedancer because I already really liked her, and I had so much fun reading Edgedancer. I did give this 4 stars. I mean, there's really not anything specific about it that was holding me back from a 5 other than maybe the length, even though it is almost 300 pages. There just wasn't quite like enough to it for me to want to give it 5 stars, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I guess I would even say that this is more of like a 4.5 that I rounded down to 4. It's definitely not a story that you have to read if you're going to read the Stormlight Archives, but I do think it's good to read because it gives you more context about Lift, as well as another character that I won't name. And at the end of the audiobook, there was this little couple-minute spiel by Sanderson explaining why he wrote Edgedancer and how it fits into the larger story of the Stormlight Archives, and I really appreciated that insight. And so if you are really enjoying Stormlight Archives, I definitely recommend going to check out Edgedancer. Unless maybe you really hate Lift, then maybe you can skip it. Okay, the next book that I finished in the month of October, I actually have all the rest of these physically, which doesn't happen all that often, but I read Teeth in the Mist by Dawn Kurtagich. And this is a YA horror book. It is set in our world, but with like magic and paranormal kind of stuff. I was really looking forward to this one because I absolutely love Dawn Kurtagich's And the Trees Crept In, which I read last year, maybe the year before. It's my favorite YA horror book. I just recently talked about it in my fantasy horror recommendations video. I didn't talk about this one in that video because at that time I hadn't finished reading it. The thing about Dawn Kurtagich's books, at least the two that I've read, is that the audiobooks are fantastic. They are such a production. This one had multiple narrators, and The Trees Crept In I think only had one. But there's a bunch of like sound effects and things that they add in and like echoing, and this one had demonic voices because this is actually a Faustian retelling, which is the retelling of the story of the guy or the monk who sells his soul to the devil so that he can live forever. At least that's what I got out of reading this book. It's definitely creepy, especially on audio. However, I have a hard time recommending doing it just on audiobook because this one, and just like And the Trees Crept In, has some really cool formatting things in it. There's like drawings and images, but also like journal entries. Like here's a picture of one of the characters. It's just got some really cool stuff. So I really enjoyed listening and reading at the same time. That's just a way that I like to enjoy almost any book, but especially Dawn Kurtagich's books, the two that I've read, I think are really great if you do it both ways. I also was primarily listening to this while I went camping, which I have a reading vlog from when I went camping if you're interested. But I think that reading this while I was camping definitely upped the fear factor, the creep factor, because I was like out in the woods sitting in front of a fire, like a campfire, and there were like animal noises, well, like crickets and stuff. So bug noises maybe is more appropriate, but just being outside in the wilderness while listening to this was super creepy. Plot-wise, there are 2/3 timelines. The third timeline is in the way past, and you get very few glimpses of that. So it's mostly two timelines. One in like the 1800s and one in present day. And then also the way the story is told, it's kind of like told in flashes. Like there's not really a good sense of the timeline. It's a little bit kind of chaotic. I find that that's something that I've seen commonly in horror, even in like horror movies and stuff. You kind of have a hard time knowing how much time has passed. That's the feeling that I got when I was reading this. And I think it just kind of like lends to the sense of unease that you get because you don't really know what's going on. But unfortunately, I felt like me feeling like I didn't know what was going on went on for too long. I said the word on a lot there, but I went through probably 3/4 of the book kind of like being a little confused, trying to figure out what was happening, trying to piece the clues together, which I don't usually mind, but the last quarter of the book was so much more enjoyable for me because I had a much better understanding of what was actually happening and how... Please don't knock my tripod. And for how the two... Hello. And for how the two timelines were going to tie together. I also didn't love the ending. Are you sad? Toby's getting neutered tomorrow, but he doesn't know it yet. The other thing is that I didn't love the ending. It was just a little bit convoluted and it left something a little open-ended, and I'm not a huge fan of open-ended endings. So the ending was a little bit disappointing to me. But it didn't ruin the book. I still really enjoyed it. I gave this one 4 stars. It's not a 4.5 that I round, it's just like a solid 4 stars. And I definitely think that reading this while camping really added to my experience, and reading it on audiobook and physical at the same time. And I think that if I had only read it physically, maybe I wouldn't have even given it 4 stars because the story itself, I can't say that I totally loved it, but I loved my experience reading it, and I will definitely read more Dawn Kurtagich in the future. Oh, I forgot to mention, I got this physically from the library. Obviously, you can tell it's shiny. So I got it physically from the library, but I owned the audiobook. I bought that a long time ago because I knew that I would want to listen to it. Okay, the next book that I finished in October was Fledgling by Octavia Butler. Hi, Toby. Please don't move my tripod. Thank you for the sweet kisses. Toby. Toby, Toby. Love you. Please don't hit my tripod. Lay down. Good boy. I had this physically from my library, and I also listened to the audiobook from Scribd. I have been wanting to read Fledgling for over a year, maybe 2 years now, ever since I very first heard about it, actually on a podcast that my friend Rachel from the Shades of Orange used to do. It's called Books in the Freezer. I'll link the podcast below. It's a horror book podcast. It's a vampire book. It's a horror, but also like kind of science fiction-y vampire book. It's been a long time since I've read a vampire book, and I definitely was feeling the itch. And I also have been wanting to try Octavia Butler. So this is about a little black girl who wakes up with traumatic amnesia. She wakes up in a cave. She doesn't remember how she got there. She doesn't remember who she is. And she is actually a 53-year-old vampire who has been genetically engineered to be able to be out in the sun more than your typical vampire. Throughout the book, you're learning more about her. Her name is Shori, and her family, and where she came from, and what happened to her, and maybe a little bit of a revenge story. My favorite part about this book was learning about the vampires. I personally love seeing different takes on different mythologies. It's one of the reasons why I enjoyed reading Twilight when I was in my early 20s, because yeah, sparkly vampires sound dumb, but I thought it was like a really interesting and different explanation for why vampires wouldn't want to be in the sun. So learning about the culture and the history of the vampires in this book, I found super fascinating, and I loved that part of it. So something that I realized in editing that I totally forgot to mention that is really important, and another reason why I really enjoyed this book, was that Octavia Butler uses the vampires and the vampire culture as a lens to explore racism. And that was a topic and a way to explore that topic that I really found interesting and really appreciated. Definitely something really important that I left out when I was filming. One thing that I will warn you guys about that I think is hard to read might be the fact that even though Shori is a 53-year-old vampire, she still has the body of a child. And these are the kind of vampires, kind of like Anne Rice vampires or True Blood vampires, where they're very sexual, and getting bitten by them is like, it feels really good or whatever. So Shori does have sex with people, with adults in this book, and I can imagine that that would be really difficult for some people to read. And there's also a like sort of biological explanation as to why a grown man would be attracted to Shori, because, you know, that sounds kind of gross. But it has to do with like the vampire's biology, and that's something that I enjoy, being a biological scientist. Like, I find it really interesting and fascinating the way Octavia Butler kind of explained how the relationship between humans and vampires works. So I really enjoyed the first half of the book. Like, I thought this was going to be a 5-star book, but the second half was not quite as good for me. The pacing was a bit slower. I did still find it interesting, but what got frustrating for me was that, like I said at the beginning, Shori has amnesia, and so she doesn't know anything. So a lot of the world building is done with her just like asking questions and people kind of explaining things, which I didn't mind at first, like in the first half of the book. But in the second half of the book, it got a little bit tiresome and a little bit info dumpy. It just kept happening over and over, and it's just not my favorite way to do world building, and having a character with amnesia is not one of my favorite tropes. So by the end of the book, I was a little frustrated with that, and it made me end up on a 4-star rating instead of a 5. But I definitely think this was a super interesting book, super interesting take on vampires, and I'm definitely down to try more Octavia Butler. I know she has a huge backlist of books that she's written. Okay, and then the last book that I finished in October, I'm a little bit cheating because I actually finished this yesterday on November 3rd, but I really wanted to include it in my October wrap-up, and that is Thunderhead by Neal Shusterman. This is the second book in the arc of the Scythe series. I have it physically out from my library, but I also own the audiobook, which I highly recommend. The narrator for the series is so great. Unfortunately, these are Audible exclusive, so the only place you can get the audiobook is from Audible. I hadn't actually planned to pick this up in November, but sort of randomly, my husband, who is not a reader typically, read the first book in the series, Scythe, at the beginning of October, and he wanted to start reading the second book right away, and I hadn't read the second book yet, so we decided to do it as a buddy read together. We've never buddy read something together before, so that was a lot of fun, and we primarily listened to the audiobook. In fact, my husband was actually asking me if there was only one narrator because he was kind of impressed that the narrator could do so many different voices for all of the characters. So like I said, I really do recommend these on audiobook. If you haven't heard of this series before, it's a dystopian series set in a world where we have created this AI called the Thunderhead that has solved all of the world's problems. There's no hunger, there's no disease, and basically nobody dies anymore. And to help with overpopulation of the earth, there are these people who are called Scythes, and it's their job to kill people to keep the population down. So in the first book, you're introduced to 2 teenagers, Citra and Rowan, and they become apprentices to become Scythes. This second book, we definitely get a lot more insight into the Thunderhead, the AI, and we also get introduced to a couple of new characters. And I really enjoyed all of that. I will say that the pacing for like the first half was like not great. There was some interesting things that happened and then it kind of slowed down and then something else interesting would happen and then it kind of slowed down. And when we had like an hour left of the audiobook, I actually stopped it and I turned to my husband and I was like, I have no idea where this is going. Like I had been enjoying it, even though the pacing was kind of up and down. I wasn't like super bored, especially being my first buddy read with my husband, and it was so much fun for me to like stop the audiobook and just kind of voice thoughts to him about what I was thinking, or he would do the same for me. Whereas when I'm reading by myself, I usually don't have anybody to talk to about it. But anyways, when we had about an hour left of the book, the story was like going in a direction that I was like, I have no idea what's gonna happen in the last hour of this book. Like I really didn't know how it was gonna end. And the ending of this book, I cried and I was surprised. It was unexpected. It was intense. I really want to read the next book like right away. It was so intense and it really hurt my heart. The villain in this book, I hate with my whole body. I hate him so much. Like I don't think I've ever hated a villain as much as I hate this one. And just I wish I could talk spoilers, but the ending really broke my heart and I was sad. I don't know, maybe I'm being too dramatic about it and people who have read it will think that I'm being dramatic. Or maybe if you haven't read it, I'm making you think it's a bigger deal than it is. But just for me personally, I was really emotional about the ending. It was unexpected for me. I had no idea where the story was going. And then bam, I was heartbroken. So I was really torn about what rating to give this. I ended up deciding that it wasn't quite a 5-star for me, just because the first half of the book I did have some pacing issues. I was never like super bored or even contemplating DNFing it or anything like that. It was just not as fast-paced as I would have liked. I just find this world fascinating, and with the way things ended at the end of this book, I am super curious what's going to happen in the next one. Oh, so I was talking about my rating. I ended up deciding to give it a 4.5-star rating, and I'm going to round it down to 4 because it was more than just a 4, but it just wasn't quite a 5. But I am definitely looking forward to reading the next one. Whoa! Hi, buddy. What is it? Look. Alright guys, there you have it. Those... You're gonna hit my tripod. Alright guys, there you have it. Those are the 4 books that I read in October. Don't forget, I also read half of Oathbringer, okay? So I still read more than 4 things. I just didn't finish anything else. If you have read any of these books, let me know what you thought of them down in the comment section, or let me know what your favorite read of October was. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Oh my god. You hit it. Ah, you hit it. You moved my tripod. Yeah, you moved my tripod. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more bookish content. That is all I have for now. Thank you so much for watching. Stop eating my shirt. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bookworms, keep reading. Bye. Hi. Oh my goodness, you knocked over my books. You knocked over my books. Come say hi to the camera. Can we take a picture together? Let's take a picture together. Come here. Oh, God. Hi. Yes. Good boy. You're a good boy. You're such a good boy. Oh, I love you. I love you. Okay, I gotta turn the camera off.